Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And today we're once again very fortunate to have as our guest Larry Johnson. He's appeared on the Gaggle before. And Larry needs really now no introduction. He's a veteran of the CIA and the State Department. He's an outstanding military and intelligence analyst. His blog on some of the new American Revolution is absolute must-reading. I mean, it's one of the first things I read every morning. So absolutely essential. It's a daily blog, and you always learn something from it. So we're very glad to welcome you, Larry. And I guess there've been a lot of developments since you were last here, but the most recent development was, of course, Ursula von der Leyen's statement the other day, in which first of all she was calling for the establishment of a special tribunal to convict Russia of aggressive war, but then she blurted out that 100,000 Ukrainian officers, she even said military officers had been killed. So if you have 100,000 officers, well, how many enlisted men had been killed? Then, however, the European Commission walked back her statement and then claimed that what she really meant was 100,000, killed, wounded, casualties. So that she didn't say 100,000 Ukrainian military had been killed. But if she was indeed telling the truth, and those numbers are close to the Russian estimates, then we're talking about casualties at a horrific level, and casualties that it's very hard to see Ukraine sustaining in the long run. So therefore, we may well be now on the way to end game, particularly if this Russian military offensive that many have been expecting to start within the next few weeks, if that takes hold, then some kind of military defeat is inevitable. Anyway, what's your take?
Larry, before you answer, I think we can come up with a new term, Lion Ula. Okay, that's who she is. That's how I'm going to refer to her in the future, Lion Ula. Okay.
Yeah, she did the cardinal sin. She spoke the truth, and then once the truth is out there, they have to corral her. I've got let's call him a new friend and acquaintance, a fellow named Steve Bryan. Steve was Stephen. He was in the Reagan administration as a senior Department of Defense official, and all along he's been, I'd put him in not quite a neocon, but close. But he's been the big cheerleader about, boy, Ukraine is crushing the Russians. The Russians are falling apart. Ukraine is on its way to victory. He did a 180, a U-turn this week. He just published a piece in the East Asian Times in which he's saying, boy, with these casualties, Ukraine's in trouble and Biden's policy is going to be dead. Now, when you look at the 100,000 number as for dead, killed in action, the normal metric is that for every one person killed in combat, you get 3 to 5 wounded. So I took the conservative side and said, okay, three of that is 300,000. Add that together, 400,000. Ukraine's total strength, manpower at the start of the war, they had about 185,000 in the active army, or 125,000, but their reserve force was 900. So what you're looking at is a 1.1 million man force. Well, if you're talking 40 to 50% of that gone, but through casualties, and that's not talking the number that have been captured and or missing, they're running out of manpower. I've drawn the parallel with this is sort of like Robert E. Lee's Confederate forces in 1864 in the American Civil War. They were the South was having trouble rounding up men that would come and fight, and they were up against the Northern forces. Northerners suffered more casualties than the South, but the South couldn't afford to lose anybody. The North could just replace the people that came in. In this case, Russia's not like the North. They're like the North in terms of having larger manpower reserves and a larger industrial base, but they're not losing people the way the Ukrainians are losing, because the the current Russian generals have not followed the example of the Soviet generals in World War II. I mean, the Soviets would literally throw masses of manpower at defended lines, and the casualties for the Soviet side then were horrendous. Not now with the Russians. The Russian casualties have been, frankly, limited because of their strategy of using artillery, aerial bombardment, rockets, missiles, all of that against entrenched positions that the Ukrainians are occupying. So it is this number, I think, is real, and what you're seeing is more reporting on it this week than you've ever seen in the previous 9 months of this war.
You know, Larry, one of the interesting things we've been watching over the last few weeks, and particularly in the last news cycle, that man named Joe Biden in the White House, is it seems to me that the Americans and NATO itself is kind of talking in a kind of a circular debate about what it'll take to come to negotiation is all that. There's not a peep that comes out of the Russian side about all of this. I mean, they might react to what they're saying, but and it's quite whimsical. Like, what are they talking about? Because the Americans and their and the other supporters of the Kiev regime, they seem to be talking to themselves, about themselves, around themselves. I don't know if that's intentional. Is it a panic? Because if they think it's going to influence the Russian side, well, then they have no idea what they're dealing with. Because as we've seen since February 24th, the Russians are going to do whatever they're going to do. It doesn't have anything to do with what the West says or that Russia should or shouldn't do, and the conditions of this and preconditions. I don't know. Do you follow that, or do you just block it out as just white noise?
No, I thought what I'm seeing, Russia's holding the trump cards. You know, yeah. Russia's playing the strong hand, and I think one of the things that has happened over the last 9 months, Russia finally came to the realization that they do not need the West. That before there was, you know, some I'll call it a sense of inferiority, or boy, we'd like to be part of that club. We'd like to be part of the West. And Russia always held out the hope that they could talk, negotiate, could be taken seriously. And this entire response of the West in the wake of this start of the special military operation has, I think, really opened the Russian eyes that, no, these people are crazy. You cannot trust them. They are not sincere about their negotiations. Right. And it is, I watched last night a monk debate that had been done, I guess, 3-4 months ago with Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer.
Yeah, we covered that. Yeah.
What a train wreck that was.
Yeah.
Gee.
Well, what struck me though was the arguments that Sikorsky and McFaul were making, because, you know, something if I was Walter Mearsheimer, I would have started off saying, well, wait a second. While Ukraine may not be officially part of NATO and the U.S. European Command have been running military exercises every year in Ukraine with Russia as the bad guy. And in fact, you can go to an official EUCOM site. They've taken it down now, but they were advertising that they were teaching cyber warfare skills, including, and they said on the website, offensive cyber warfare. So this whole notion of NATO as a defensive entity, they didn't bring any of that up, but that entire mindset that Vladimir Putin is intent on conquering the world, and that Vladimir Putin is this, you know, he's an imperialist of the first order, and it's like, folks, look in the damn mirror. You know, it's not Russia that's been sending its expeditionary force to Somalia, to Iraq 2 times, to Syria, to Afghanistan, you know, pick your country. The United States, more so than any other country in the last 30 years, has invaded other countries. Russia hasn't. I mean, Russia's military operations were in Georgia, were limited. And that's
Syria, limited.
Well, Syria, though, was different. Syria, they were invited, which is a big difference. The Syrian government said, hey, come help us, because the United States and Great Britain were funding an Islamic insurgency that was trying to destroy, again, another established government.
Well, Larry, if we're going to just quickly talk about the Munch debate, because George and I made a very long separate video about it. And George and I pointed out when Mearsheimer started out, big powers make mistakes. Remember that, George?
Yes.
And it was like, what? It was downhill from that point on. I was aghast that they would start out that way. And then the other thing that McFaul is just a bully, and he showed it himself to be a very low-octane thinker bully. He showed it very well in that debate. But Sikorsky hit on it. But Ukraine was never in NATO. But that's not the point. It's just what you just said. That's neither here nor there.
That's right.
Well,
Well, go ahead.
I said I just draw the parallel that would the United States be comfortable if Russia was conducting an annual military exercise with Mexico down along, the Mexican-U.S. border? Well, hell no. Right. And it wouldn't even matter whether Russia was offering Mexico to join some sort of military alliance. Just the mere presence doing that, the United States would see as threatening and would qualify with, in a pushback. So it's so intellectually dishonest, and that's the thing that frustrates me, watching in this country people who are educated, people who have the academic credentials, and to be so obtuse and so dishonest, to ignore all objective facts with respect to this engagement. So I feel like a little bit like the salmon trying to swim upstream in a flood.
And it's very interesting that in that debate, McFaul said, "Oh well, yes, I know we promised every year since 2008 that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, but Russia shouldn't have taken our promises seriously because we were lying. So we were just lying. We it wasn't meant seriously." Well, imagine, if the United States says, well, let's say North Korea says, well, we are going to attack South Korea, but, we're not going to don't take us seriously. We're just lying. I mean, if somebody says something, then, particularly if it's your adversary, you have to believe him. I mean, if NATO keeps saying year after year, and they said it the other day again, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. I mean, what kind of an irresponsible Russian leadership would say, no, we don't really believe it. It's just simply untrue. They're just simply, blowing off steam. It's a totally ludicrous argument. But both McFaul and Sikorsky said, yeah, that's right. It wasn't really meant seriously.
Well, George, keep in mind that Michael McFaul and Sam Bankman-Fried are from Stanford. I think birds of a feather. Okay.
Yeah, no. It is.
Oh no! We never intended a fraud. No, of course not.
No.
Well, when you see videos that are posted online, again by European Command itself, the U.S. European Command, based in Stuttgart, which shows U.S. Marines and landing craft landing on the shores of Ukraine, you go, how exactly is that a defensive maneuver? That's an offensive action. So if you're a Russian military analyst or intelligence analyst, you've got to be looking at this and saying, let's ignore what the Americans are saying. Look at what they're doing. They are practicing an amphibious landing on a country that's right on our doorstep. And we're to pretend that means nothing? I mean, come on. So the thing that's really fascinating, though, is this entire military effort by Russia in Ukraine has exposed the weakness of NATO. I mean, it's literally being hollowed out. This notion that they had the best weapons, which they don't, that they had ample supplies, which they don't, but moreover, the industrial base for producing new supplies is not there. It can't be turned on like it was in World War II. I always go back and use the experience of World War II as a benchmark, both because of what what Russia, the then Soviet Union did, and what the United States did. You know, the United States, when the time it was attacked, within very short order, it was producing 147 ships, naval ships, a month. It was producing one aircraft carrier a month. And the Soviets, they packed up their entire factories that were in the West, moved them on to the other side of the Ural Mountains, and they were producing tanks at a rate that exceeded what the United States was able to produce. So again, we keep getting this mythology in the West about how Russia is so poor and so inept, and you know, they're like basket weavers. You know, their economy is based upon basket weavers and making leather belts.
Well, Larry, I mean, it's one of the things that George and I have chronicled over the years. We can look at this Skripal affair or Navalny, all these other affairs that are invented. And what the West wants us to believe simultaneously, that it's the Keystone Cops and 007 at the same time. And you can't have both at the same time. You know, they're inept, but they're so devious. They throw elections all around the world, and you know what? We can't catch them doing it. Okay, you know, it's a very schizophrenic view of Russia, and what compounds it for me, living here for so long, is that, have you noticed, if you look at cable TV, everyone and their grandmother apparently is an expert on Russia. But if it comes to a country, let's say Zaire, well, you gotta call around, okay? You know, there are investment funds, universities, and we can talk about. But no, when it comes to Russia, well, whatever her name is, bring in the green room. Let's talk about Russia, and this is so patently obvious, and that's what devalues any kind of conversation, because all you're supposed to do is say bad things. It's always it's a who can get to the bottom first, okay, in their slur. And this is a huge disservice to the public.
Well, I was on a Zoom call this Tuesday with it's a group of very accomplished, I don't know why they let me be part of the group, but there was an individual on that call. I will not mention his name because he's a very well-known, almost famous U.S. politician. And I asked who was a historian, as sort of a clue. And I asked him, I said, why is there such animus towards Putin? I said, if you put Vladimir Putin on one side and Xi Jinping on the other side, and then you total up the, quote, misdeeds of each, the Chinese have far more misdeeds in terms of hostility towards the United States, just simply from an intelligence standpoint of stealing industrial secrets, etc. I said, why is that? And this guy, he was dead serious. Well, Vladimir Putin was a KGB officer, and and it was like,
okay.
And we didn't have a chance to go into the discussion, but the discussion I wanted to have with him would have been to say, well, let's step back and look at this. How many countries have been overthrown by KGB operations compared to CIA operations? Well, the reality is not very many. So on that standpoint, the reality is the KGB is a much better intelligence organization than the CIA, because at least they've got a very clear sense of what it is that they're defending and protecting. But when you've got somebody who is this educated, this experienced, and was very senior, at one point could have been in line for the presidency, to hold that kind of view underscores what the Russians are up against. That there is nothing they can do.
But what's interesting about that, and that's very typical, is that the model that the Western analysts use when talking about Russia is Stalin, the heyday of Stalin, which again, I mean, he was in power for 25 years, but they always pick on the sort of, you know, the few years of Stalin's terror and think that that characterizes Russia. So when they say KGB, they of course mean, you know, the NKVD at the height of the purge, right. Everyone was arrested and sent to the gulag and so on. But that's the model. And that's why all these people like
George,
Applebaum
exactly. I was going to say all the emigres,
That's right, exactly. And they all that's how they present Russia. Oh yeah, people are just getting arrested all the time. You know, you say something that Putin doesn't like, boom, you're arrested, sent off to the gulag. And that's the model. And that's very, very important that they have to frame everything in that term. And that's why that whole line about, oh, he's KGB, so therefore Putin, Beria, Stalin. They're very important. They always have to have that as the model of reference.
It may not mean a lot to you guys, but there's a singer named Alla Pugacheva in Russia, and she's kind of like Elvis and Frank Sinatra put together, and Madonna. Okay, I mean, she is the icon of many, many generations, and she when the special military operation started, she got up and left for Israel. Okay, and then her husband did too. And then she came back and she blurted out what she thought about what's going on. I'm back to bring my children and my grandchildren out of this country. And it was all covered in the news. No big deal. Did she have her assets stolen? No. Would she have her passport taken away from her? No. As a matter of fact, they had crowds cheering on her leaving because they love her so much. They don't care what she thinks about Ukraine. They just love her so much. I mean, that at the highest level of culture, you could say what you want, and there's no downside. I mean, if you work maybe in media and say, well, you know, this is a media company and this is our line here. If you don't want to support it, well, sorry, okay. But you have your opportunity. No one is, you know, no one is fired for that. Okay, if you break the law, you break broadcast law, yes, you can get in trouble. But it's so overwrought what they're saying. You come across people all the time saying this is wrong, or I think we should get it over with, or we should fight until we get what we want. I mean, it's varied here. It's just as varied as it's far more varied than it is in the United States. I'll put it that way.
In fact, the point, the irony of all of this is that the United States is now doing the very things that it has accused Russia of doing. When you look at the political prisoners that are held in this country for the so-called insurrection on January 6th, the denial of due process, the denial of the writ of habeas corpus. So it is the persecution of people and the demonization. It's really a threat to the fundamentals of what the American narrative has been. And, you know, your point about Stalin, a lot of it goes back to who gets to write the history. There were, you know, I understand why the things that happened under Stalin happened in terms of the political, you know, creating a new political movement. Just look at how history would have been written if Abraham Lincoln had lost the Civil War, because Lincoln was locking people up without in violation of the Constitution, and was responsible for, you know, massive deaths on the part of other, you know, American citizens in the South. There's a way that you could spin it to make Abraham Lincoln into a monster, whereas this, you know, I guess it's the whole Manichaean outlook, you know, that you got to have the white and the dark, and there's no gray, ever gray in between. It's always black and white.
Well, that's a very interesting thing, because of course, as you bring up with Stalin, is that but what are the circumstances? Circumstances, you know, they fought a civil war, they won a civil war, and had the expectation of you know, Allied intervention, and then of course after the Allied intervention there was the threat of a Nazi invasion. So, you know, you can't just take it out of a historic context. Any more than, incidentally, when at the start of the Cold War, when the United States was, you know, basically militarily very strong, but the Soviets tried to keep up. Well, there was a reason why they tried to keep up. They were afraid of you know, military inferiority and all that involved. And yet, in the way it was presented in the West is that, well, communism fails. It fails, you know, people are poor. Well, they're poor because so much was invested in the military. I mean, in order to basically maintain the Soviet parity with the United States. Yeah, that led to insufficient investment in consumer goods and that kind of thing. So you kind of have to take it in a historic context rather than present it as the good and bad. Oh, that was terrible and that failed, and whereas we had success and and everything was good on our side.
And this kind of this preoccupation with Stalin is ever present. That is such a anti-intellectual approach to a problem, because if you invoke that, then you're just saying, well, it's evil, and so why should we argue with evil? And again, it's when we look at Stoltenberg and his ridiculous utterings, and Burrell, even worse, word salad. I mean, he could be in competition with Kamala Harris for when it comes to making sense. They're the ones that speak about security, but it's the Russians that have the security arguments. They don't have the arguments when it comes to security whatsoever. They always invoke everything else but security, and this is part of the dilemma that they've created for themselves. Going back to my original comments, Joe Biden, is the Joe Biden administration talking to themselves about this because they're not addressing the issues that made this conflict come about in the first place.
Yeah, well, this it was pointed out to me by a good friend. You know why they've been pushing the expansion of NATO? It's a very simple reason. They don't have enough troops in their own countries, so the only way you can build up the actual force of NATO is by bringing in other countries. So that's the only way. When you look at what's happened to what Poland's military is, like 60,000-70,000 total, their army, that's nothing. That the UK is down to maybe 60,000. So it's almost like these people have gone to fantasy camp.
Well, don't you think, Larry, that's excuse me, that's why they want to get Moldova in, and Armenia in, and Azerbaijan in, because they're relatively poor countries to at least the rich West right now. But that would be good cannon fodder for them. Join join the NATO European Army. I mean, that would be a very attractive to a lot of people there that are only maybe one generation from goats. Okay, George and I have talked about this, is that this would be the cadre that they would want to recruit, because when they talk about this rapid deployment for 400,000, who are the 400,000 that want to do that in Europe? They're not there.
Well, on top of it, when you bring them in, then you've got new customers for the Western military contractors, because we're going to standardize all the equipment so we can always use it interchangeably. And therefore, have we got a deal for you? It's so cynical, and it's so it's been dressed up in the costume of we're defending ourselves from this international aggression, and in fact, we are the aggressors. That's why I put a piece up on Sonar 21 the other day based on pogos. There was a cartoon character in the United States. It was called Pogo. It was a possum, and this possum made the statement, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." So and that's really where we're at right now. The United States is, and I'm sad to say, is more of a force of evil in the world than a force of good. And it's been ongoing now. We're well into it. With I sort of marked the real start of it with what happened in Libya, and the so-called start of Arab Spring, and then spreading the liberation to Syria, where we're really killing, allowing these people to be turned into cannon fodder, and that's really I think that's where sort of the worm really turned against Putin, because he had the audacity to come to the aid of Bashar Assad and say, "Hey, we'll help defend your government against this outside interference." And he was thwarting what the United States and the United Kingdom wanted to do, and that is just unthinkable. And from that point on, Vladimir Putin had grown fangs, and and had blood dripping from his mouth as far as the West is concerned.
But I think it started even before that. I think, if
Yeah,
you think I think the Balkans. It was the first time that, so, again, all the piety, defend NATO, defensive, we're purely defensive, we have no aggressive intent. And then how are you suddenly bombing Serbia? I mean, Serbia is not a NATO power. This isn't part of NATO area of alliance. And suddenly, they were doing this, and they suddenly started inventing all manner of missions for NATO, and of course there was a NATO component to the Iraq war, because United States, UK started it, but then NATO moved in. I mean, it moved in the train of the US and the UK. So the whole idea that this is a defensive alliance, that was shot by the mid-90s when they started bombing Bosnia.
And if you want to look at domestically, because it's very, very important, and I think that it's reflected in Western media. We could look at the Financial Times, for example. Putin comes to power on New Year's Eve 2000. Young reformer, experienced bureaucrat. He speaks German. Okay, and they gave him, they pumped him up. Then the UCOS affair came about, and that changed everything, because it was the oligarch wars that he fought domestically that started pulling the fangs of the West out of the Russian economy, particularly the energy sector. They never forgave him for that, because UCOS was supposed to be an American Texas-owned oil company. All the paperwork was done. All it needed to be was signed, okay? Yeah. And so George is right, and then you look at domestically, because the U.S. and Western oil majors were shown the door, that he automatically was a bad guy. If he had allowed that to happen, it would be very, very different.
Yeah, well, in fact, I had a front row seat to that. I was there was a lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., APCO, and I was hired by them to work on the Khodorkovsky thing, because Khodorkovsky was one of their clients.
Yep. And
they were trying to gather information about what was really going on. So I was, what was that, about 2003?
Yep.
It illustrates the fact that these Washington lobbyists, I mean, this is right on K Street, as which is the main street where the lobbyists are storied to have occupied. But they were panicked. The Americans were panicked. The reason I brought up the Arab Spring, the 2012, was that was the first time where Russia put military force overseas at the request. In fact, they did what the United States likes to pretend that it does, that it's invited into a country to protect it. In this case, Syria genuinely invited Russia in, hey, help us. And the Russians responded. And at that point, then, the United States was forced to share the battlefield with the Russians. I know that the U.S. military command down in Qatar, at Al Udeid Air Force Base, they had a joint operations center, and the commander of that operations center was on the phone every day with the Russian counterpart, coordinating and deconflicting. So that went on for 5-6 years at least. I think it finally came to an end with the start of the special military operation.
Right, but that was also very interesting, because they had an agreement that was signed by the Obama administration and the Russians, that they would undertake joint operations against ISIS. Right. And then, lo and behold, the United States just went back on the agreement, deceived the Russians, and launched an attack, an unprovoked attack on the Syrian armed forces. So that was the end of that agreement. But you could see that even at that stage, the U.S. military really wasn't going to put up with any kind of a joint and coordinated activity with the Russians. And remember, Hillary Clinton in 2016, in her campaign, she was advocating a no-fly zone in Syria. I mean, her plan was essentially, to start shooting down Russian planes in Syria. Much of the media said, "Yeah, great, that's a good, tough position." So, even at that stage, I mean, the Americans were not at all agreeable to sharing anything with Russia in Syria.
Well, this goes back to what Larry just is first answered in our podcast here, and I want to kind of expand upon it, because I think Larry's absolutely right. Is that as this ridiculous commentary in the media about we need a ceasefire now, it's time for diplomacy, magnificent Milley with his ridiculous ramblings. But Larry's absolutely right. This is crunch time. This is decision time in its outcome time. There's no compromises going to be made. Maybe something tiny little things on the margin, but the administration is fooling itself. It's always fooling. It's always lying. Is that it's not going to get anything that it wants right now. And I think they're absolutely terrified of an entire being totally blown out. That's why Stoltenberg keeps playing this ridiculous game. We're not involved in the conflict and all that. But he absolutely knows, if Ukraine is absolutely obliterated, which it will be, is that NATO will be left hanging in the wind naked, and they all know it. And so that's why, and I agree with Larry. I mean, even before the conflict, with my Russian friends, I'm well liked by them, but I think they always thought I was a little too dramatic or too radical. But I said, you can't trust these people. They will never be honest with you. Never. Okay. And then when December 17th, now it's almost exactly a year. I said, and I went on the Jimmy Dore show, and I said, the Russians aren't joking. They don't bluff. They act.
Yeah. Well, let me read you a quote, because again, I think this illustrates part of the problem. This is a quote from this Asia Times article that was written by Steve Bryan. And Steve is a smart guy, and he's experienced. He was a senior U.S. defense official. But listen to this. It shows you how out of touch with reality they are. He said, Russia, as is by now well known, also has serious problems both in recruiting and training soldiers and its ability to replace weapons. But Russia also has huge war stocks it acquired before the downfall of the Soviet Union, and it is now bringing some of them to bear on the Ukraine war. Now, I went, huh? The S-400 and S-500 certainly were not part of the Soviet Union's military stock. The caliber missiles that are being launched by sea and air, that wasn't Soviet stock. I mean, this notion that all that the current Russia is some doddering fool that's having to go to an army surplus store to pull things together is just nonsense.
But what's interesting about that is also that the Russians have essentially destroyed everything that NATO has thrown at it, all the HIMARS and all the howitzers and all the Javelin and the Manpad, surface-to-air missiles, yes. All of that they've thrown at it, they've basically been destroyed. I mean, the West is saying, hey, we don't have any more. Well, so that's quite a feat to be able to destroy everything that NATO has thrown at it.
Okay, and Larry, before you answer, just as a kind of a footnote, yes, Soviet stockpiles are being used. They're being used as like roadblocks. An old tank from the 1960s. They don't let anything go to waste here. Believe me. If it works, save it. Okay. And what they do, if particularly in the Donbass, close to the line of contact, yeah, they'll bring out an old 60s tank. It still works. Okay. If you small arms fire against it, it won't be damaged. Okay. It protects the troops. Yeah. They don't let anything go to waste. They don't leave things behind like we did in Afghanistan. Just, I think our viewers should know that. That's all.
Yeah, no, well, no. What this entire one thing that has been exposed over the course of the last 9 months is how inadequate and ineffective Western weaponry is. Again, it enjoyed this mythology of supremacy, that it was great, and you don't want that. The Russians sell crap, the United States sells Cadillacs. You get the old Lada from the Russians, you get the Lamborghinis from the West. Well, now they've discovered that it is Russian air defense that shoots down anything that the United States puts up. And it has caused some real serious consternation among military planners, because in the past they thought, okay, we can send our fixed wing aircraft, our F-35s, et cetera, flying in to Russia if need be, and we'll come out on top. That's not true. They know that's not true. They have never seen an integrated air defense system like what Russia proposes. What the United States has is a Patriot missile system that they give to the Saudis as an example, and it can't even shoot down drones being sent from.
Larry, does the Patriot system work?
No.
Okay.
I mean, against, yeah, they can fire it and it'll go up in the air and it might hit something, but in terms of actually reliably bringing stuff down, no, it doesn't. And the same with, I'm amused that they want to give Taiwan 155 millimeter howitzers, and I'm going, well, that's only if China invades, but equipping Asian allies with artillery doesn't make a lot of sense, since the enemy is China, has this huge land mass. You've got an amphibious land there, and the United States has no means to do that. So therefore, let's ship all this stuff into the Ukraine, and they're now running out. That is the thing that should catch people's eye, that when they said, oh, we're going to do 100,000 shells to give 100,000 from South Korea to Ukraine. Well, okay, that's 3 days of what Russia is firing, and constantly I hear it from analyst after analyst in the West. Russia's they can't keep this up. They're going to run out. What it exposes is the lack of intelligence on Russia's industrial capability. That in fact, Russia is able to keep providing it. Yeah, they may be drawing down some old stocks, but they keep producing new stuff, and they're doing it rapidly. They're not saying,
that's interesting, because that goes against the constant talk in the West, which is, oh, Russia has an economy the size of Spain's. And this is even repeated, by, sensible people, like such as Tucker Carlson. He says, oh, well, we don't have to worry about Russia. That is an economy of the size of Spain's. I mean, it's an absolutely meaningless terminology.
And so is GDP and all.
Yeah, GDP, and they used to do that incidentally with the Soviet Union. Oh, I just I mean, what a joke! Their GDP is about 1% of that of the United States. It doesn't matter if you're the biggest oil producer in the world, biggest steel producer in the world, and you got to churn out tanks, artillery, at the scale of which the Soviet Union did, and obviously Russia does now. It does, the whole thing of GDP just means absolutely nothing in that context.
And on top of it, even just a casual review of the nightly broadcast here. Yeah, Russian factories they have 3 shifts a day, 24/7, 24/7, 3 shifts. I mean, that's not a secret, okay? And it's not propaganda, okay? 3 shifts. They're churning out the best that they have. As a matter of fact, as Larry has pointed out, is that a lot of new systems have been deployed. I mean, the Iranians are deploying some of their new systems with the help of the Russians. Okay, I mean, the fact is that NATO is being shown for the fraud that it is. Okay, it was never meant. You joined the club because you knew it would never happen. That was the selling thing. You come on, join NATO. You will never have to go to war, and we'll supply the arms. We'll be your umbrella. You have to pay a lot though, but you have your security there. It's all been proven to be a complete fraud.
Yeah, well, NATO is basically it's a jobs program for white guys. Okay, it's a welfare program. You get the military because you got to have a position where you can have justify having a 4-star and a 3-star and a 2, senior ranks. And they got to have something to command, even if it's a paper organization. And NATO's reason for being ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the breakup of the Soviet Union. At that point, we'll go back, historians will go back and look at this period from 91 and then in the aftermath of 9/11, of all the missed opportunities the world had to have created a different kind of world. If the West had genuinely worked with what was left of the remnants of the Soviet Union in reconstructing and rebuilding, because the enormous wealth that is there, natural wealth that's in Ukraine and in Russia, if there would not have been this rape mentality on the part of the West, they kind of would have found a way to have partnered and actually bettered the lives of everybody. But no, didn't do that. And then the military adventurism of the United States, that again, in the aftermath of 9/11, when the world was united, I think Vladimir Putin was the first one to call George W. Bush and say, hey, what can we do? And made sure that the northern forces in Afghanistan were cooperating with the United States and going into Afghanistan to try to root out Osama bin Laden.
So what happened is, yeah, that's right, because what NATO did was it moved the line of contact that prevailed during the Cold War 1,000 miles eastward. It's a fundamentally very aggressive move. I mean, there it was, the line of contact was in Berlin, and they moved it 1,000 miles eastward, right up to the Russian border. I mean, what else is it other than an aggressive act? And how else would the Russians interpret it other than as an aggressive act when you moved yourself 1,000 miles eastward to our borders? So,
well, the other thing that's not appreciated in the West is the transformation that Vladimir Putin pulled off in Russia. I mean, in 1998, 1999, Russia was a shithole. It was, things weren't working, and
I was here.
Yeah,
I was here.
So what the infrastructure was like, and when you look at what has been built over the course of the last 20 years, and the improvements that have been made both to the subway system, to the rail system, to the the airport, across the board, it's a kind of transformation that the West likes to believe that it is enjoying, when in fact Russia has done it. And when you go to the streets of New York City or San Francisco, bring your hazmat suit, because it's really becoming unlivable. And yet Russia's accomplishments on this front are completely dismissed and minimized.
What's been going on for 22 years is just two things, and I've been saying this for 22 years: reform and sovereignization to ensure the sovereignty of the Russian Federation. And it's and actually I think you can see the second one on sovereignty play out to some degree on how the special military operation was conducted. And I think it's been left wanting. George and I have talked about this at great length. But if you look at reform and sovereignization in terms of the military, well, territorial defense, that was top of mind, and it's always been top of mind to defend the territory of the Russian Federation. And this expeditionary force, it achieved some goals, but certainly not all of them, because the Russian military, instead of looking for places around the world to insert itself in, they've spent since the advent of Vladimir Putin on fortifying the homeland, and they've done a really good job at that. And also, just as an aside, because I do live here, Larry, I'll tell you one thing: the modernization and reform sometimes goes a little too far for my taste, because it's losing the local culture taste. I don't like these steel and glass buildings. I hate them. Okay. and there's more and more of them coming here. Okay, so they're like the Váci Utca in Budapest. Here it's Stadiarbat. And there's a lot of people like me that's saying, get rid of these international chain stores. You can go to the same chain stores, across the river. They're at that shopping mall. Let's make this street just Russian, okay? One street, okay? And with the advent, I think it was with the coup in February 2014, having lived here for a long time, that is a pivot point when the demonization of Russians, the killing of ethnic Russians, Russian speakers in the Donbass. For 8 years, the public here watched it, and that slowly turned Russian public opinion against the West. Because I think I might have mentioned it with you guys before, but anytime Lindsey Graham or John McCain or Hillary Clinton, whatever they have to say about Russia, it's on the news. It's on the news here. So, and people say, this is what they say about us. This is what they think about us, okay? And it makes a huge impression. There's no filter. See, knowledge about Russia is so heavily filtered as it goes to the West, but it's not the other way around. There's no filter here at all. You see exactly what they say.
Yeah. Well, and it's remarkable, too, in the West that no appreciation of the role that Russia has played in keeping the U.S. Space program alive. I mean, without Russia, the U.S. would not be in outer space right now because it was critical in providing the rockets. I have a question for you guys, because this is sort of, I've been wondering about this. If, from a Russian military standpoint, with the Dnieper River being a natural barrier, and last count, I think there's something like a total of 10 bridges, 11 bridges across from east to west over the Dnieper from north to south. Why has the Russian military left all those bridges intact? Because, one thing that they could do, for example, is if they took out all of the bridges, then whatever that arm, and including the bridges that carry the rail lines, then all of those troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in the Donbass and in Kharkov, they'd be cut off, and they would be isolated and easy to encircle at that point. They couldn't be resupplied. Why do you think they haven't done that?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, what I think, and something that I've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, is that I think we're going to get Special Operation 2.0, and very, very soon. And I personally think, and I'm not a military expert, but I think that they want to draw in as much Ukrainian forces with NATO equipment as much as they can pour in there, and then have a pincer, and just because I think the offensive, knock on wood, that is being planned right now, I tend to think this is going to be the knockout blow. First we'll get a massive strikes on infrastructure, massive. What we've seen is just a preamble to date, and then the bridges go out. You have I think it was who was telling me it's like George, you probably know the number, 535,000 troops now that have been mobilized. They're not going to be idle for much longer, okay? And I think just it's like a pincer I mean, those bridges will be valuable to the Russians when the conflict is over. Let's put it that way, okay?
Yeah.
But but on the other side, you have to be able to control the other side of the bridge to keep it of value. That's my own personal opinion. I could be obviously very wrong.
No, well, it's one of those things. I see some options that the Russian military has that it has not taken, but it does not appear that it's been lack of resources or lack of will. It's just that the Joint Staff hasn't called me up to give me their strategy, to clue me in what their long-term view is. But I think you're right that the whole demilitarization is a key objective. And that is in fact taking place, because you just saw the other day, yesterday, was it France? France finally told Ukraine, okay, we're tapped out, no more from us. we can't provide you anything
Well,
else.
all the more so, because this is something George and I have grappled with for a long time, is what does it mean for demilitarization to be meaningful for the Russians? And in talking about territory, I tend to, territory is of less importance to me at this point in time, because it gets down to the calculus of, it's not what Moscow is going to control in the former Ukraine, but it's what Kiev will control in what will become the new Ukraine. And it doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter what they control to one degree or another. It's just that they don't have a military. They don't have a, if you can have all the fields you want, okay, but if you have any military to defend it, then who cares, okay? Right. And that kind of resolves the issue of, what about going up to the Polish border? Well, if you don't have, the Kiev doesn't have a meaning. But it doesn't
resolve the issue.
Let me finish my point, okay, and I'll pass it over to you, okay? that potentially solves the kind of political problem of what kind of power, not the regime type, but power that Kiev. George, go right ahead.
No, I mean, the problem is that it doesn't quite resolve the problem if NATO will continue to arm.
No. I'm talking about demilitarization. Yeah. No NATO. No.
Right, but I mean, NATO will continue with what it's been doing. I mean, that's
there's no Ukrainian army.
Well, okay. I mean, that's going to be dubious, but okay. I mean, I guess. I mean, we already have a situation in which essentially it's a NATO army. It's already being replenished by NATO. NATO will still continue. I mean, just as it took 8 years from 2014 to 2022 to build up a Ukrainian force that was reasonably competent. They're going to continue with that, and so you still have that problem of NATO continuing to fight with Russia.
But if they don't have a, they don't have.
It's not. You're not going to wipe out the entire armed forces. I mean, that isn't going to happen.
Well, we'll see what that means. Okay, Larry.
Well, no, I think right now, look at it from the standpoint of Ukraine. Ukraine does not have the ability to sustain itself, either economically or militarily. It is entirely dependent upon aid coming from the West. So then, as I say, what's the picture in the West look like? Are Germany and France and the United Kingdom and the Netherlands and are all of these countries enjoying an economic rebound and prosperity and low prices and ample supplies of food and fuel? No, it's just the opposite. They are facing some significant economic challenges. So this is then going to create this dilemma of, can they continue justify sending literally millions, billions of dollars to Ukraine when their own domestic economic situations are in such turmoil? I don't see how that happens.
What about the United States? The United States is a different case, though. That military-industrial complex has been powering their economy for decades. I mean, it's pretty much been dependent on that powerhouse of its military, aerospace, and so on. They can continue doing it. In fact, they depend upon that.
To quote the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the chickens are going to come home to roost.
I think Larry's right. It's a combination there. I think it's a sea change I have experienced during this conflict. Is that, and I think George got tired of me asking people who's got the clocks and who's got the time. I stopped doing that. And I asked you that on my program, and you said both. Okay, both. And I think that because it's so frustrating when you see the capacity that Russia has, and then you see the slow pace of the conflict. It's very frustrating for people here, okay? But there's still, people are still trusting the authorities. There's no lacking of that. But I think that, the more I look at it, is that these two dovetail together, this slow grind, which I hope will speed up, and then this fatigue and fatigued of having to have to fund this ridiculously corrupt government in Kiev, and then the consequences that each country has to be. Look at the price cap on Russian energy. I mean, look what that did to the European Union. I mean, it really shredded them. Okay, still another example, and it's not even going to work. Okay, even when it comes up in 3 days, it's not even going to work. So I think it's a combination. I think the Russians planned on this.
Right, but European fatigue is, I think, a little different from American fatigue. I mean, let's say Republicans are now coming in to power now, at least in the House of Representatives. I mean, the media go on and on about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a very significant force. You know,
it doesn't even have a committee.
No, the people
she doesn't even have a committee.
No, the people who are running the committees. Look at the people who run the committees. This guy McCall. I mean, you know, he's as rabid Russophobe as they come. You know, the people who matter within the Republican Party in the House of Representatives are not Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they are hawkish. I mean, they attack Biden administration for not doing enough for Ukraine. I mean, they say, hey, you should have been giving them more. We've got to give them more and more. We've got to send them missiles that can actually reach Russian territory. So you know, that fatigue, that collapse of the American will, I don't see it yet. I mean, it may happen, but I don't.
Well, I mean, but George, the problem, I theoretically, I don't disagree with you whatsoever, but the facts on the ground, and Larry has pointed out already, you give them, and I'm not good with the acronyms and the military and stuff. So you give them, you know, base technology, then you base technology plus, and then you get the better system, and then you get almost the best, and then you maybe we'll throw in the Patriots. But as Larry's pointed out, it's having no effect whatsoever. Okay, I mean, at a certain point, you're going to have to realize, what do we have to do? Go to nuclear war, which I think hopefully that is off the table with everyone after this ridiculous escapade that the Ukrainians did with Poland. No, I mean, I agree with you theoretically, George, but at a certain point you say, what are we getting for this? Because we're not getting any progress whatsoever.
Okay, but that's the theory. That's the sensible, common sense position. I haven't heard it yet. I mean, the only people who say things like that, again, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Doug McGregor, you, Larry, us.
Yeah, we're a minority.
I don't see it in the seats of power in Washington.
Yeah, no, we're a minority voice. That's true. You remember when the delivery of HIMARS was, quote, a game changer?
Yeah, everything's a game changer. Yeah,
Scott Ritter and I disagreed over. You know, we had our own disagreement over that. Scott thought it was, and I said, well, I think I've been proven right that it didn't change a damn thing. All it did is it may have put some more money at the bottom line of Lockheed Martin, who is, I guess, the manufacturer, but it also exposed that the U.S. government, oh, hey, we got to order some more of these HIMARS. Let's get with it, and discover that Lockheed Martin produces in 1 year what the Ukrainians were firing in like 1 month. Okay, so. Yeah. You got a production problem, and they said, oh yeah, well, we'll have these ready for you in a year. It's like, you know, so that when you put all this together of the actual reality of these weapons in terms of being able to produce them and send them forward, you know, like right now, I think McCall was one, you know, again, he's a dummy. He was saying, oh, we got to get the M1 Abrams over to the Ukrainians. Do we hate them that much? You know, we're gonna give them a piece of crap equipment that, you know, breaks down and is difficult to maintain in the field and has a real operations problems. Yeah, with friends like that, you don't need enemies. Is my point. And it goes back to the book that Andrei Martyanov wrote, Losing Military Supremacy, because what he highlights in that is the entire structure of the U.S. defense system is predicated on politics and what's good for a congressional district. It's not based upon a real defense strategy of how do we defend our nation, and let's put a integrated weapons system, defense system together so that everything's complementary. Instead, we're producing things like the F-35, which is what, $35 million a pop. So you can buy 257 of those planes for what Russia spends on its defense budget every year for everything. So that kind of disconnect is an economic reality that the United States is not coming to grips with, and it's going to accelerate. There's a strong jobs report today, 263,000 new jobs in the United States, but the red lights are flashing in terms of job losses and industry shutting down and supply chains. Everybody that I know that is a very seasoned investor and monitors the economy, they're all predicting a nightmare for the United States next year. So in the face of that nightmare, I don't think the United States can sustain the operations in Ukraine, particularly when there won't be any victories to show. I mean, they've been told repeatedly, oh boy, the Ukrainians, man, they're going to march to Moscow. And I keep reminding folks, I said, look, for 8 years, the Ukrainians had just the Donbass to contend with, and they couldn't capture that. So now all of a sudden they've got magical powers. I don't buy it.
So what happens now? I mean, what's your prediction? Yeah, prediction for the next, short term. The next 3 months.
Or your prediction before we meet again. Go ahead.
Before we meet again. Exactly.
So I think I'm looking at the collapse of the Ukrainian army. I don't know, within probably the next 2 to 3 months. I don't see how they can sustain operations beyond that point, because of the losses are so great, which is now sort of universally acknowledged. New York Times is out today talking about the catastrophic losses that they are incurring. So it won't just be the manpower issues. They will not have the weaponry to fight with, because it's being destroyed and the West does not have ample supplies. So I think this is going to precipitate the political crisis in Kiev. I think Russia.
I would add to that, Larry, is that amazingly, the U.S. and the European Union have taken over the fiscal responsibilities of the Ukrainian government, where they're going to see where that money goes. Well, or said differently, they're going to see what that money does. And it's not doing much, and it won't do much, because it is just endemic. That is exactly, before the conflict, before I was blacklisted in 2014, I went to Ukraine many, many, many times. Lovely country, lovely people. But it just, everything was corrupt. I mean, I came to Russia in 1997. It was really bad, but even that, the corruption I saw in 1997, it doesn't even compare to what I saw in pre-2014 Ukraine. I mean, and it is a very, very unfair society, and it's very brutish. Okay, nothing has changed, but the West has been enabling that. It's been enabling it for 8 years.
Well, when you look at the number of Americans, Hunter Biden, John Kerry's stepson, Mitt Romney's son, Cofer Black, the CIA guy, that are all on these boards and are involved directly with corporations inside Ukraine. It's like, why Ukraine? I mean, there's Mexico, there's Canada, this goes to the heart of the corruption that's underway, because what Ukraine is doing is buying access to the United States, and in buying that kind of access, they're buying political favoritism. And Ukraine has been directly involved with let's call it the allegations of Russian interference. It's actually been Ukrainian interference in the U.S. election, and it's been done with the full cooperation of the Clintons. So, and it goes to that corruption, because Ukraine is the best country money can buy, I guess you can put it that way.
And now, do you go along with what Doug McGregor predicts, that there's going to be a massive offensive, maybe starting in any time now, within the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think there will be. I think the buildup of Russian forces up in Belarus, and Belarus as well stepping up its activities. I think there's going to be something coming from the north. the Russians have their doctrine is they're not going to show their hand. They're very good poker players. I think one of the problems we've run in here, and let's use sports analogies. The United States, when it thinks of war in terms of football, American football. So you've got set lines, and you move up and down the field, and the key there, winning is scoring. Whereas the more popular sports, and particularly in Russia, hockey and soccer, and those, you're not always advancing the ball. Sometimes you're falling back. Sometimes, you put the puck back across the blue. It's not always forward. You do want to score, but the process of getting to that is different. And I would argue that those create different mindsets and how people think about conflict and think about strategy. And so from that standpoint, I think actually Russia has an advantage there. They're good at misdirection. And what the dolls within a doll, what is it called? Maskarova?
Yeah, there's the dolls. Yeah, I think it's Maskarova, the dolls. Yeah, the Russian dolls.
It's always hidden. It's never completely clear where they say, okay, yeah, we're going to tell you what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. So it is. I think the West will be surprised by what Russia does, because they've convinced themselves that Russia's on the ropes. They're running out of missiles. Those missiles, it's going to end any day now.
It's very interesting what you said, because I remember, Jack Kemp, was always saying, and he was a former footballer, he's saying, offense is the best defense. And he always repeated this, and everyone said, oh, that's really profound. Offense is the best defense. But of course, as you say, in soccer, that isn't true. I mean, you keep attacking, you're going to just open up, spaces in the back, and you're going to lose. So it just doesn't work in soccer. Offense is not the best defense.
Well, look at what Russia did in withdrawing from Kherson to go back across the river. To explain it to American audience, I've used, think of New Orleans. If you've been to New Orleans is situated in a way sort of like Kherson. Because you've got the mouth of the Mississippi there. The city of New Orleans is on, in this case, the east bank of that river. And if you were just on that east bank and relying upon getting across that river from west to east for supplies, you'd be in trouble. So just like, you kick the ball back downfield to get it to your goalie so he can then, kick it back upfield. They withdrew across the river and then are in a much better position to be resupplied and to defend. And it puts the Ukrainians in the more uncomfortable position of trying to defend a city which has no electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's just, you
Well,
want this, have it.
And I think also in tandem with what George just said about the expected winter offensive, is that the infrastructure of the country is just it's grinding to a standstill. What happens weather-wise, what happens in Moscow right now, where I am, it's really cold outside. Yeah. Ukraine's about 10 days, 2 weeks behind, okay? And the same temperature will end up there. It's going to be a very uncomfortable place to be very, very soon, okay? And I think that that's also part of it. And I think that the grading of the infrastructure and the military operation, I think that's going to be something that's going to be, it'll be Russia's version of shock and awe, okay? And I want to point out to everyone, because I've been criticized quite heavily about the humanitarian crisis in which when you attack infrastructure. Yes, but infrastructure has dual purpose, okay? And that's why it's being attacked. And on top of it, which no one wants to mention, is that the substations that everyone likes to talk about or pretend to talk about when it comes to the electricity grid in Ukraine, that problem can be solved very, very quickly once the conflict is over. Because mark my words, I don't have any evidence, but mark my words, there are warehouses after warehouses of the same generators being stored in outside of Moscow or farther afield. And when the conflict is over, they're going to bring them in and they're going to replace them Because if you look at, they take out the substation. It's like taking out the circuit. They're taking the circuit out. They're not taking everything else out. They're taking out what makes it work. Okay, that can be replaced. The West will never be able. I mean, I don't know. It will take a Marshall Plan for them to replace that. Okay, it's all old Soviet technology.
Yeah, I think one of the effects with the weather as well. It's going to. It will probably increase the casualties of the Ukrainian troops for the fact that as weather gets colder, they're going to be hunkered down more in fixed positions. They're not going to be as mobile. Tanks, vehicles are not going to be as frequently used to move about. So it will be easier for Russian targeters to get fixed locations to hit. And as a result, once you're getting your position bombed, where do you go? Particularly when it's, sub-zero temperatures, and exposure can really be life-threatening. At the same time, as the infrastructure attack continues on the ability to supply electricity, to supply gas, to supply water, the resupply of the troops on the front lines is going to become more difficult, not easier. So it's really the combination of all those things coming together. I think that Russia's calculating that, yeah, we can do this, and we can. It gives they have an advantage simply because the lines of communication for Russia are far shorter and more secure than anything that Ukraine has. That Ukraine, they keep talking about the HIMARS and damaging Russian supplies lines. That's been very, very sporadic. It's not sustainable, and that's the thing Ukraine doesn't have. Ukraine has no way to strike behind the lines in depth against Russia, whereas Russia has that full capability. It's just this is a lopsided war. And
what is the mechanism, Larry, for ending it? How does it end? Does the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, call up Patrushev and say, "That's it, we're calling it quits. Let's have a peace conference," or Ukraine says, "That's it, we're out of here"? I mean, how does it end? Because at the moment, there's just simply there's no negotiating process. It's hard to see what the mechanism is for ending it.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be Russia dictating terms. Number one,
I agree.
I think it's going to one of the precipitating events may be a military coup against Zelensky, forcing Zelensky out. Some in the Ukrainian military. I mean, you've got some senior leaders still in the Ukrainian military that were trained in Russian academies, and are not necessarily filled with the same sort of nationalist hate that has been the hallmark of people like the Azov battalions and such. They'll realize that they'll be sickened by the utter destruction that is coming on the Ukrainian troops and people at that point. I mean, because it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So at that point, when they start negotiating with Russia, working on the effective surrender, what's NATO going to do? NATO does not have the ability to project military force into Ukraine. They have been entirely dependent upon the proxy, and by that I mean putting their weapons, and even the Poles have put some troops in, and the Poles are suffering terrible losses. I mean, this is, it's starting to surface in Poland, and they're going to say, wait a second, what's happening here? We can't sustain these losses. So it is the combination of, if you will, General Winter and General Surovikin combined, I think, are going to bring an end to this. And then at that point, it'll be up to the West to see if they can rebuild bridges. I don't see how the West, particularly the United States, reforges relationships with Russia right now. I don't see how, because the rhetoric is so vitriolic. It's so black and white that Russia's the ultimate evil. All things Russians are evil, and that anybody who dares to try to talk sense about Russia, like myself, are immediately labeled as Russian sympathizers. How much are you getting paid? Well, nothing. I wish I'd get my check.
But what happens? Okay, come, Peter. Yeah,
I think I agree with you, Larry, and I think that the prognosis for the future is spot on, and I think that was built into the mix here. Okay, I think as you see, you know, it's I don't have the number on the top of my head, but it's something like 75-80% of mid-sized companies, businesses, they've turned the corner. I mean, they found different ways to get their financing done, and they have new partners and all that. I was wrong. I said repeatedly we could see real shortages in Russia in the third and fourth quarter. I don't see any, okay? Except for my girlfriend's favorite perfume is gone. Okay, we can live without that, okay?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that this is a serious breach, and it's I remember saying on the day of the conflict that, on February 24th, they said this is at the very least a generation breach, maybe generations breach. And I think they're prepared for that. Just because of what you said, the first thing you said to us this evening is that the political elite here is so utterly disgusted with their quote unquote interlocutors. They're tired of 30 years of lying, of deception, and just, the empire of propaganda. They just had enough of it. Okay, just had enough. And I think that people here are coming to terms with that. Yes.
Right, but there's another aspect to it, is that let's say it ends just as you say, Larry. Basically, maybe there's a coup in Kiev, Zelensky is removed, and essentially NATO sees that it lost this war. What would then be the political repercussions, say in Germany? Because and the people are going to turn on Schultz. He said, you led us to this policy. It was a catastrophe for us economically and politically. And for what? What did you do? Why did you do this? And then you kind of wonder, will there be that popular turn against NATO? So this is an absolute disaster within Germany and France or in Italy. So we had this a year of economic crisis, and we got nothing for it.
Yeah. And I'm rubbing my hands. Good, George. Thanks. Good work. Good summation. Yep. And on top of it, there's no Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Exactly.
Okay. No matter what the outcome of the conflict is, there's no pipeline.
Yeah, there will be, I guess, let's call it inverse correlation. As the economy worsens in Europe, their ability to sustain and support NATO operations will demand, or I guess it's a direct relationship. Worsening economy, less support for NATO. If the economies were doing well, they could probably find a way to put lipstick on the pig of the defeat in Ukraine. But without that, I think it's going to lead to the fragmentation of NATO, and ultimately its end. It will be
the EU.
Yeah, it's both are anachronisms, and both are not contributing anything. The other element in this, and Putin, and I think it's not just Putin, the Duma in Russia have been clear about it. The perversion in the West, the culture, the promotion of homosexuality, the promotion of transgenderism. It's like a sickness that has taken hold, and Russia rejects it outright, and they're not going to be bullied into accepting it. They're promoting, let's call it, traditional Orthodox Christian values. Well, that is, the fact that rings great so much in the West just shows you what the West has become. And it is, this is not just, I think, a war where Putin is trying to prevent NATO expansion. This is a war to save Western civilization. Candidly, that's how I look at it.
Well, I mean, and you remember during the quote unquote Orange Revolution, remember, in the West pumped in, particularly NATO countries, targeting Ukrainian youth. It's a civilizational choice. Well, they had no idea how right they were, because from this side of the pond, you bet it is a civilizational choice. And the global majority, not the global South, but the global majority agrees with those values, not the slop that that's being churned out by the West. Okay, the West grossly overplayed its card, because the more they show it to you, the more people say, we'll watch it on Netflix, but you ain't bringing it here.
No, I mean, it is the intensity with that message is being spread here in the stateside is it's unbelievable. I don't know how much you get it over there as far as what's happening here, but the glorification of transgender rights has become, I mean, it's like considered one of the top 5 issues, I guess, and people get canceled for having the audacity to speak out against it, and it ultimately destroys society. And you're seeing the ramifications on the U.S. side. U.S. military can't fulfill its recruiting goals in any of the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, because parents who come out of traditional religious households are going, I'm not putting my kid in with these bunch of maniacs. They're promoting something that's nonsensical, and
it doesn't look at it's going to change anytime soon. First of all, I'm not at all sure Republicans will ever be able to win another election, because the Democrats have now worked out a mechanism for winning elections. But also the kind of leaders the Republicans have thrown up, particularly the congressional Republicans, they don't provide any real resistance to this. So I don't think it's going to change that.
Larry, I never would have thought that when Pol Pot was resurrected, it would be in America. Okay, because that's what I see is Pol Pot and his little fanatics, with their little book, and that's what from the outside, thousands of miles away, that's exactly what it looks like to me. Okay, Pol Pot is running the show.
Yeah, there are a few places of refuge in the United States, like Florida, but these other states are. It's people watch what is happening in places like New York City or San Francisco, where San Francisco used to be a wonderful city to visit, but I've talked to people who've been there recently, and they're literally stepping over, human waste of all sorts, and needles and open air drive. I mean, it's just, it's like a scene from a.
And that is in some of the good neighborhoods. In some of the good neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for giving us your time. It was another fascinating, wide-ranging discussion. I mean, I enjoyed immensely, learned a great deal, and I'm sure our fellow gagglers will greatly enjoy it. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. Remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.